Okay, Michelle, you want to hit the play? Hit that red button.
Good afternoon. Today is Friday, September 21st. We are in the home of...
We're at Cactus Shadow.
We're at Cactus Shadow with Mr. Chmielewski and Eileen, his wife, in Phoenix, Arizona, to hear about his military service. My name is Henry Zhang, here with Barbara Hatch, the advisor of the Veterans Heritage Project with Chaparral students. So, Mr. Chmielewski, could you tell us about your military service from the time you were drafted, with any background information that encouraged you to join the service?
Okay, I most certainly can. But for the records, I was drafted only after I had joined the National Guard. And the reason I joined the National Guard, because at that time, our president was Lyndon Baines Johnson. And every week he would come on news stating he would come to me with a heavy heart. And that usually meant more and more soldiers were being drafted into the service. I didn't buy the war in Vietnam, and I still don't, looking back on it many years later. So I thought the only best way for me to handle a situation, being a male that was obviously very easily slated to be drafted, I figured the best way to ensure that I wouldn't be, at least involved in the war directly, was to join the National Guard. And I did, and I joined the National Guard with the express purpose of doing whatever service I could. Took the test, they give you an entrance exam, and they determined my MOS, military occupational schooling, would be a 91 B20, which is a medic, field medic. So with that in mind, those are about the only numbers I can ever remember. And they're embedded in my mind, this 91 B20. So I became a field medic. I did my training, my basic training I did at Fort Gordon, Georgia. And that was my basic training. And I did my AIT, advanced training, at Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas. Ironically, my dad, who was involved in World War II, did his basic training at Camp Gordon, the same place, only with a smaller name and actually smaller accompaniment. We both were drafted. He was a U.S., he was drafted. He shipped out to go overseas from Fort Lewis, Seattle, Washington. So we almost parroted each other in our history of the military. More about my military background. When I was at college, I was at Cal State in Northridge, studying English speech and drama. My real forte is drama. And while I was there, on September 13th, our daughter was almost a year old. Would have been a year, I guess the June would have been her birthday. Received a call and a notice in the mail saying your friends and neighbors had selected you. I immediately want to know who they were. Not to thank them, to say, why me? So I was drafted, and they gave me 30 days to finish my business, and we reported into the military. From there, we shipped out my unit was in Burbank, California. We shipped out to Seattle, Washington. And there we had all walks of life. Our average age there amongst the soldiers was 25 years old. They were older people. We got to remember now, this is the rise of the Tet Offensive. They had already drafted as many people as they possibly could at that age level, so they're now dipping into the old timers, which would have been us. Didn't matter the schooling or your rank or your station in life or the occupation. We had George Goebel's son in my unit. We had Sid Charisse, who was a dancer. Her son was in there. And as much as they tried to, with all their money and influence, they stayed with us. And off we went to Seattle, and we spent 2 years there fighting through Congress the illegal act of how they drafted the National Guard unit into a combat situation. It was illegal at that time because they could not supposedly take a National Guard outfit out of a state to use in a conflict overseas. But they did anyway. This is, again, my friend, Lyndon Baines Johnson, whom I have a trophy in my room honoring him. I believe it's in the bathroom, but nevertheless, it is a room. It's there, high on a shelf. And nevertheless, he went there, and we proceeded from there to the individual. They never took our unit as a unit into a combat situation. Although the unit I was attached with was called an Armored Cavalry Unit. And what it means is tanks. These were the tanks, not the little howitzers, but the big tanks that were firing. My job was just to supply military help, medical help, for those injuries. The injuries we normally incurred were usually men who had lost their thumbs in the breech. When you load in these packs and the shell, there's a breech you close before you fire. And of course, the proclivity is to lose one of these digits and thumbs. So I don't know how many of those we sewed and patched up and tried to save, couldn't save, but nevertheless, that's what we did while I was there. Most of the injuries and the other injuries would be from packs of gunpowder packs, or the packs, they look like almost like big, huge wafers. And depending on how far you wanted the trajectory, whether it be 2 miles, 5 miles, that's how many packs you put in with the shell. Those that you didn't use, they threw off to the side. They had a big pile of like a bonfire, and they'd ignite them. And we've had a lot of soldiers who were burnt, and that was other injuries we've incurred. So that's why my purpose was there to more or less ensure that the injuries were not obviously fatal. Those that we had saved, we sent them back to McCord Air Force Base, Madigan General Hospital, which was an Air Force base right adjacent to Fort Lewis. The other part of it, so we spent a year and a half, I would say, at Fort Lewis. Then they shipped me off to Fort Dugway in Utah. Again, my main job was sitting in a room similar to this with a cup of coffee, monitoring a TV. And my sole purpose there was to watch what was happening to the sheep. They had sheep that were tethered to the ground, and they would howitzer in, these are like little cannons, of anthrax or poison, and my job was to watch them. They would quiver, salivate, and drop to the ground. And then medics would rush in and shoot them with atropine syrettes to revive them, if they could. We weren't so concerned about the sheep, but it was the medics we were going to watch to see that they didn't go through the same kind of motions. Sometimes they would have a crack in their mask, or a mask wasn't on tight enough, and once that happened, then we'd have to rush out there and do the same to them, revive them as quick as possible. Dugway, Utah is coming to the news in recent years because of the anthrax. This is the same place outside of Utah, 88 miles into the desert, where they used this anthrax as a possible biological weapon. We never did use it. However, some of the civilians out there who were working, as we found out later, stole some of the stuff, and they did use it against our own people in the United States. So I was discharged from Fort Lewis in '69. I was discharged early because I had a petition to go to college, finishing up my college. And I finished at Cal State. Then I used the GI Bill to finish that off, and I started at a school called Middlebury College in Vermont, Breadloaf School of English. This is a school that sits on top of a hill, and they specialize just in English majors. Robert Frost taught there and lived there. And it was kind of ironic, a little digress here in the story. My mother grew up in a little town called Derry, New Hampshire, which is like 12 miles just, outside of Boston. She had in her high school, which was called Pinkerton Academy. The early schools were called academies. She had Robert Frost as a teacher and couldn't stand him. He was born and raised in Derry, New Hampshire, lived maybe within a quarter of a mile from each other, but she had nothing but negative comments about the gentleman. I never had him personally as a teacher, but when I went up to Middlebury and studied up there at Breadloaf, he was like the patron saint up there. And I had to chuckle because I said, they haven't heard my mother's version. So it's kind of ironic. Anyway, I graduated from there, and then we moved to Arizona, and the rest is history, so to speak. I became a teacher of English, speech, and drama. The military, anything more you need to know? I can go on for days.
I want to know more about the sheep. So these were real sheep?
These are real sheep that were tethered. And they'd fire these howitzers. You know what a howitzer is? Yeah? Okay. It's a little small cannon. They'd fire in these projectiles and then explode this poison. And you'd watch the sheep on television, and you'd see it, because their first reaction was they'd be drooling uncontrollably, and they'd be urinating, defecating, and then you'd see them shake, and then the legs would fall out and they'd fall down. Then the medics would run in, because they wanted to try this atropine sweat, this sort of a cure for what the sheep had, an antidote. They'd shoot them and then hopefully revive them. But as I say, sometimes the medics' masks weren't on, or they had a crack, or the mask itself had become, what do they call it, denatured, Eileen, to use medical terminology. And for whatever reason, they would fall into the same victims as the sheep.
Oh, really? They'd start drooling?
Oh, yes, they'd go through the same thing. Now, the medics all carry with us, and we did at that time, an atropine syringe. And it was a funny looking thing. I mean, we practiced on each other and on ourselves with them, but not with, the actual antidote. They had actually saline solution. But it looked like a big pen that was spring-loaded. And they said, all you do if you feel funny, just take your hand like this and jam it into your thigh. And I said, do what again? Okay, so many times we tried this, and of course after many repetitions, we shot each other so many times. That's the problem with the medic. There's no volunteers. You are your own volunteer with your buddy. You know what I mean? You name a shot. I mean, I came out of there, I thought I was delirious one day, because I don't know how many shots we get in one day, but what's this for? Don't even ask. But we'd shoot each other, in the legs. So they knew exactly what to do. But there are times when it didn't react as quickly as it should, and that's when we'd evac them out.
So these guys would also drop too, and somebody else would have to go shoot them.
That's right.
What kind of poison was this an antidote for?
Some of the stuff we never knew, because they had GS ratings working out there. These would be civilians. These would be chemists and biologists. And hush, hush, we weren't supposed to know. All we had to know is, and pray like hell.
So how would you know the antidote if you didn't know?
The only one we had was that atropine syringe. I would presume it would probably be nerve gas. It wasn't anything like mustard gas. It was all probably nerve gas or something related to it like that.
Not anthrax, because that
Wouldn't be anthrax, I don't think. But you never know. I say that quickly, but then how do we know anything unless we try it, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a possibility. We never knew because, see, the people in Salt Lake City, where they would store all of this stuff, were in bunkers. And if you're ever in Salt Lake City, you go off into the desert, 88 miles, you'll see these, they look like tombs, like big beehives almost. Well, that's where they store all this stuff. And I always had thought when I went into Salt Lake City, asking these people, do you object to this? I know I wouldn't want to live here, but they didn't care. Or it just didn't bother them. They thought, the military thought, well, whatever the military is doing is safe. I never had that assurity. I still don't. And
Where I was supposed to
yes.
You were saying that you were working on the injuries, on the injured soldiers, but you stayed stateside, so they were bringing them back.
Oh, no, these are actually training. I'm sorry, I probably didn't make that.
Yeah.
I probably didn't make that clear. I apologize. This is part of the training. We would train out there in the. I don't know. Have you ever been up in the state of Washington? That was my first experience up there. There's a place called Yakima Valley, and when you get past Yakima Valley, it's desert. I mean, there's nothing out there. I mean, I remember going out there and seeing, just sand dunes. It was like, this is weird. This is Washington? Because, you think of Washington with lots of rain, which it had, just the opposite. And so we would train out there firing our howitzers, and sometimes we'd be up all night. And this is when I finally realized how much money the military can waste, tax dollars, our tax dollars. Everything in the military is based on what your monthly allotment is. In other words, if this is the month of September, you're allotted so many dollars. And you've got to expend it before you get October's. Mm-hmm. If you don't get October's. So we would spend all night, the tanks would line up, and all you would hear for 24 hours was just cannon shots. Bam, bam, bam. Grounds vibrating. Shooting at nothing, just shooting, practicing. And at the end of the day, I mean, you put your hands in, like, you just couldn't believe it. Part of the training also, we ended up in Death Valley, which was a place called Fort Irwin, IRWIN. And that, again, is Death Valley, and you can imagine how comfortable that place is. And we would train out there in the summers, And I was in what they call an APC, an all-purpose carrier. This is what the medics were, they're small track units. Well, you couldn't touch the outsides of them because they're all metal. You know how Arizona is? Well, this is even worse. So you'd have to almost like roll up your sleeve on your jacket and make little, I don't know, what do you call those things for the ovens, these little gloves, you know what I mean?
Mitts.
Yes, mitts, thank you. Like mitts. Or take a pair of socks you had and use those, you know? And even that wasn't enough. Again, unbearable heat. I mean, the funny thing about being out there, I told my wife and she said, well, you got too much sun, which is possible. She goes, the days were so hot, yet in the evenings, you'd freeze. I mean, the chill would go through, you couldn't get enough clothes on. I mean, you'd sit there like this, and you were just chilly. I got home to, one of the weekends I got home and went back home and we were living at that time in California. And I can remember very distinctly, it was like 95 degrees. And I said, this feels good. And she said right away, we're talking about a divorce now. You are definitely loony, you know. It was that much of a degree change, you know, for me. But anyway, my experience in the military has always been one of, I was drafted into it like my dad, but we made the best out of a bad situation. I often kid, I think if I hadn't been married, hadn't had a child, would I have gone to Canada? Because I respected those people who went off to Canada, who were drafted Dodgers. I know our country looked down upon them. But I've always thought, there's got to be a reason, because a lot of these people were college-educated people who were draft dodgers, and they had to have a conviction so strong to put themselves in that much peril. And so I respected them, because I respected what they were doing for us. I can remember being in Seattle, having a leave time there, going into town, and of course you look military because you get what they call white walls. The side of your hair is shaved. They call them white walls. So they know you're military right away. Even though you're wearing civilian clothes on your leave, they know you're military. And I remember the girls and some of the men laughing and jeering at you, calling you baby killers. Why are you baby? And I looked at them and I said, if you only knew baby killer, I'd be on the Puget Sound right now heading over to Vancouver if you only knew the whole story. So it was that kind of anguish. So I had that dilemma for a long time, and my wife will testify. Many of letters home saying, I got to get out of this. I don't know if I'm going to make this. The only thing that kept me going was the guys in my unit who had the same desires I did. We were all professional men at that time. We had doctors, lawyers, businessmen who had already been in the private sector making living comfortably, who lost everything because they were drafted into the service. And once they got out, they'd have to start all over again. So it was an experience. One of my best friends was Dr. Perzak from Salt Lake City, Utah, who just came back from Vietnam, and he says, Norm, do whatever you can to stay out of this. He spent 18 months there. And at that time, the tour of duty was 13 months. But they extended him because of his MOS was so demanding, doctors at that time. And I said, well, trust me, I'm not volunteering for anything. But it got to be so that with staying at Fort Lewis, while I was there for that year and a half, they never took the unit as I stated, but they started taking individuals out of our unit, which was another illegal thing they got away with. So that one day, every morning you'd line up, and it was almost like a bad movie. You fall in the morning at 6 o'clock, and they call a roll. The following men fall out. You go, and you hear the names. And one of the most courageous things I've ever seen was a guy by the name of Mort Lobb. This guy, I swear to God, I've never seen him since. There was a guy next to me who got his name called, and Mort Lobb stood up and said, I'm not married. I have no kids. I'm taking his place, if that's okay. So they scrapped his name off, and he went over. He was there 2 days. He was sitting on a Jeep, from what we understand, having breakfast. And a burst of machine gun just blew right upside of his arm and across the shoulder like this. He lived. But you can imagine the state he was in. I never saw him since, but I came back to the States afterwards in California, went to the barber, my barber, who was also in the service with me, and he said, Mort was in last week, can't lift his arm up, and he was a very thin man to start with, he was a shell of a man, but he says he'd do it again because he couldn't see any of us going over. think about it, and I don't know. That's a hero to me. Going above and beyond what he didn't even have to do. Because nobody, I mean, I could not imagine myself doing that, so that's why I praise this guy even more. It's God. And I knew this guy, we were like brothers, because we'd go to these meetings together when I was in the National Guard. We do everything virtually together. He was such a neat guy. He came from a very wealthy family, too, which is another striking thing. You think, well, this guy's got nothing to lose. Just the opposite. His family owned Laub's Bread, L-A-U-B-S, and he was from Shaker Heights, Ohio, a very exclusive community in Ohio. He had plenty of money. I'm sure he was a millionaire plus, his family. So they were well into money, but he just had a strong desire just to help people. What one heck of a guy. God, I love that guy. Yeah. Best fun I had in the Army, the most fun. My job since I was medic, we had a guy named Pappy, who was a first sergeant. So he pulls me aside and he said, "Ski." I was either called Ski or Alphabet.
You know what?
Alphabet. Ski. Here I go. Ski was my name, and my buddy's name was Megna. And every morning they'd call us out once a week, because we have an inspection. And he says, "Ski," and when they call him Meg, or Magnet. That's because they deliberately mispronounce your name. Magnet and Ski and Alphabet. Fall out. Get a haircut, come back immediately. We were the only guys in there every week that had to get a haircut. So we go down to the PX, and all the guys in the unit would be laughing, "Hey, going down for another haircut?" "Oh, yeah," you know, and they didn't have to. What they didn't realize is we'd go down to the PX. Well, these guys were in parades. We were drinking a beer and having a hamburger. So we come back, and the sergeant said, "God, you've been gone for a long time." I said, "You should see the line. You're lucky we're here." So we come back. So actually, it was one of these good things to turn into, to turn into a wonderful, bad thing to turn into something wonderful. Well, anyway, this same guy, Pappy, says, "I'm giving you a job." He says, "You can't get the haircuts right." He says, "Let's see if you can get this right." He says, "I got a German police dog here." And I said, "Yes, you do." He said, "I know you love animals, because this dog follows you around all the time." And I said, "Yeah, I love it. He said, "I want you to take care of this dog because it has a hip dysplasia, which is very common when you have German Shepherds because they're inbred so much. And I don't know if you know what the dysplasia is. It looks like when they walk, they rumble. You know what I mean? They just look like a rumble. Yeah, a rumba. So he said, "I want you to take this to the vet." And they give him shots. Well, I don't know what they were giving him. I guess probably cortisone or whatever to help ease that pain because the joints, aren't meshing quite right. They're rough. So they try to lubricate it as much as possible. So my job was taking it to the vet. So I had this very distinguished, I guess, did I have any awards? That was an award right there. I was in charge of the dog. And that dog would sit on the passenger Jeep side like it was one of the soldiers. So proud and sat there. And I'd give it out of the car and I'd give it a command. I can't remember the command because he gave me the command. It was like a guard command. This dog was very, very much a docile baby. But once you gave him that command, you would not want to even touch the Jeep. Teeth, he looked like he was suddenly possessed. Cujo time, you know what I'm saying? This dog, his hair in the back of his neck was up. He looked like a porcupine. Stood up, and when he stood up, this dog was at least, he had to be close to 100 pounds male. He was solid. Beautiful color, browns, blacks, you know what I mean? Just gorgeous. And then I come back, because some guys go by and try to, pat him. And I come back and I give him the command, and he just simmer right down, sit in the chair, pat him. And the guys look at me. What the hell the dog is that? And so that was my job. It was a job that somebody had to do it. Of course, while the dog was getting this vet checkup, I was in the PX again. I made sure that the service did as much for me as they could. I'm in here for a reason. I was good for the morale of the troops. I don't know what else. But that was our job. And ironically, did I ever go overseas? No. It's a very strong possibility I could have been picked. But what a lot of people don't realize, they think of Vietnam vets, they think, well, all vets were in Vietnam. Not true. Most vets did not go to Vietnam. They were called, some guys actually went to Korea. I found that out. The place I was at, Fort Lewis, was a shipping out point, okay? And of course the Marines were there, we had the Navy, the Air Force, and every person who was drafted, let's say, the Marines, they don't like to admit this, you know, they're proud little thing. The Marines actually had to draft towards the end of the war. So they were drafting soldiers, something they said, well, and they would say, this guy was drafted, yeah, he was drafted. They didn't like it. But those who were drafted, they took one for the Army, one for the Marines, draft. So you never know where you were going. Those who were drafted, of course, some of them, the Marines, would end up in Korea. They'd get on a plane and you didn't know where you were going. I remember telling my dad, I said, well, I'm at Lewis, and he says, well, relax, Norm. He says, you never know where you're going to go. He says, when he landed at Lewis, they gave him all winter gear, snow boots, parkers, things like that, and he was supposed to head to Germany. He got on a plane only to find out he was in the Philippines. So he had to take all the stuff off, and they threw it in a pile and burnt it. And they gave him what they call jungle bunnies. These are the light clothes, the pants, and everything else. So you never knew where you were going. I didn't know from day to day whether I was going to be on an individual levy, as they called it, or, you know, I kept hoping that, you ever see Madge Klinger? I thought, I could wear a dress. I could swallow my pride. I could do crazy things. But I never came to that. Okay, I've always loved. I started off in life as an independent. But my uncle once told me after the election, he used to look at me. He's a great kidder. He said, "How did your candidate do?" And I said, "Well." He goes, "I'm surprised." He said, "It wasn't surprised. It was either Democrat or Republican. There's no independent that's going to win anything." So I was a strong Democrat for the longest time until LBJ. I think I became a Republican. I did, honest to God. That's how much I hated this guy. Because my attitude at that time was pure dove. And I still believe that. I want to believe that we can get a lot more accomplished than war. And it really bothers me. It pisses me off to no belief to see these soldiers coming back, limbless, armless, just wounded with all these different kind of ailments they have, only to find the VA hospitals shut them out because they can't give them the proper attention they need. Now, I know my dad got malaria when he was in the Philippines, and he spent almost a year at what was the name of the hospital? Walter Reed. And he'll tell you that once you get, stung by Annie, they call it Annie, which is the Anopheles mosquito, but the GIs call it Annie. Once you get bitten by Annie, you never know if you're going to live or die. And until the day he did die, every time it got to be, the weather got a little chilly, he would sit in a chair and he would go through the DTs. He'd get almost like a reaction again to it. He would get yellowish complexion, and then he'd put some blankets on to get all himself all warm. The next day he'd be okay. And he said, this is all part of this malaria thing he got. It was just incredible. So if you go into the service, you never come out the same, whether you come out physically impaired, emotionally troubled. So I have a lot of respect for those soldiers that go in, nothing but respect. I would never spit on them, degrade them in any kind of fashion at all. My problem is what this country is doing to help these people. We're not doing enough for our soldiers. That's my spiel. And I saw that at Fort Lewis. When I was there, we had to take our soldiers sometimes over to Fort Lewis because, they were injured, and sometimes we couldn't help them at our dispensary, so we'd take them to Madigan General Hospital, which is the main hospital at Fort McCord. And we'd go over there, and I'd go through the wards, and these are guys coming back from Vietnam. Some of them limbless, some of them limbless totally, some of them, just, all screwed up bodily. And the saddest thing, just give me a shot of just pure air. And I went, oh, shit. I said, I can't do it. And this guy was just crying. He said, I can't live. I don't want to live. And I said, oh. I said, I just can't do it. So those are the kind of people that you don't see on pictures because it's ugly. War can be very ugly. And this is what I saw. I saw the ugliness, and maybe it was a blessing that I was a medic, because I had sort of refortified my beliefs of what I think is important in the world. See, I think human beings are important. I think lives are important. I think most of the problems we have in the world can be talked over rather than fight over. My wife laughs at me, but 3 or 4 years ago, we were in Dillard's. And she always used to ask me, well, why were we in Vietnam? And I said, I can't give you an answer. I don't know. It's not like World War II. My dad said, well, we're fighting for a nation here. And so I was buying a pair of underwear. Okay, it's the only pair I ever bought. I still have them. I just wash them. And I remember looking at the underwear, the label, and I called her over, and I couldn't stop laughing. And she looked at me and said, why are you laughing? I said, this is why we were in Vietnam. Made in Vietnam, the underwear. I said, what better reason? So the merchants can, capitalize on our endeavors. I only wish some of the soldiers would have got some of that. But I digress. Obviously, I haven't talked enough.
I have a question.
Yeah, but by all means, yeah. Otherwise, you'll really shut me up.
So you said how all the other guys really changed, after, going through all that. Did you change at all? You said your beliefs were fortified a little bit, but...
Yeah, I think I have. Probably my wife did. I become more adamant than ever about war. I look at these people who want to start wars, even though some of our politicians. And it bothers me that they want to, and it doesn't matter what war, where it is. I mean, we could say, how about Mexico? There's a good war. Let's start with them. We can win, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what the condition they want to go to war at the drop of a hat. And I think to really have a smart person, be it a president or a statesman, you've got to have a person that's willing to sit down and say, might is right, but before we get to that point, let's hear out the whole story. I mean, we hear about Iraq now saying, well, the president, got bad information. Well, why did he get bad information? Did he take the time to want to sit down? This is the thing. And we've seen Kerry come back saying he threw his medals down. Remember that? You see it in the news. And then later he picked them up. I understand his feelings about that because people are used as pawns, as sort of like machinery parts. They're throwaways. This war has gone on way too long for me. We're in our, 10th going into 11th year in Afghanistan. That's 11 years. Think about that. How many lives and how many families have been torn apart because of that. What is the possible gain? That's what I want to know. What are we gaining from this? And my feeling again is the people that started these wars, right? If you really go back into their biography, they had very little or if anything to do with military themselves. I don't know, something about George Bush hanging out in Alabama as a pilot kind of bothers me. He's a pilot in Alabama, but he's running propaganda for other politicians, while the guys I was with were shipped off to Vietnam, some of them, It didn't seem quite right. It still doesn't. As I say, the unit I was with were older. We were probably more prone to be fighting the actual establishment at that time. We were not the typical 18, 19-year-old that was drafted. We, as I say, 25, 26 years old. So we were older, maybe a little more quizzical than the average. Most of them were, I would say most of them were college grads, or if not college grads, in the process for college. So there was always this inquiring, always this quizzical mind of, do I really want to go to Vietnam? Is there really purpose in this? I think if we ask more of those questions, maybe our history would be on the upbeat for once. I'll have to see a generation where we don't have wars. That's my goal. And maybe that's what, if I've changed, I become more adamant about let's talk before we do anything. And maybe that's why I became a teacher, too, to bring some kind of knowledge and input into the teacher. Kids, to me, if they don't ask me questions, either I'm asleep or they got to be dead. That's why I look at it. I look at it both that way. And so that's what I do. Ironically, you should know this, that I've never advocated, being a teacher or being in the military for my kids at all. My daughter is in the Navy. She went in and became an officer. She is an RN. She married another person who's in the Navy, and they're stationed at Guam now, and he's a commander. My wife is a medical technologist. She told her, don't go into nursing because you check other things. Don't do just because I'm a nurse. She became an RN. My son, after looking at me coming home battle fatigued every day from the classroom, bleeding through all the orifices, haggard, worn out, he became a teacher. So we did something wrong. I don't know what. I guess we should have told them become these things, and they would have become something else. But we've always challenged them, and we've always told them, do whatever you want, kiddingly, just be happy. Any questions more about the military? Thank you very much. That was a great question.
Thank you.
So, I think you said you drafted what year? 68?
67. That was the Tet Offense, just the start of it, if you remember. It was when they were drafting, everybody else. And unfortunately, they did not have at that time, thank you, females were not drafted into the military. I say unfortunately because I was looking for that one female to take my place. She never showed up. But they weren't. So the Tet Offenses was one of those. So it was at the peak. And they had already gone through the draft. This is when they were, let's be honest, they were at the bottom of the barrel. That's why I was in. We knew that. We went, okay, we were the scrubs. You know what I mean? And I guess originally the plan from Lyndon Baines Johnson, the president, was to keep us stateside because we had just gone through a riot in L.A. But then he decided, well, I can't get any more men into the service because, the war was really escalating beyond control, and the hatred was becoming more and more prevalent in our society. He said, well, God, what am I going to do with these guys? I've drafted so many of these guard units throughout the United States. Hell, send them over. If they get killed or shot, or who cares? They're troublemakers anyway. They're thinkers. Come on. So we were sort of a throwaway. Some was alike. When I see MASH, that was our unit. Do we have any volunteers? As I say, this guy Lobb was the only volunteer that I ever came across in my life that I knew of. Did we have any fatalities there? Sure did. I'm sure we did. I didn't want to know about them because, again, see, we're very friendly. I, to be honest with you, have never, once I left the military, kept in contact with any of them. My wife will tell you, when I got out of the service, I had a duffel bag. Anything that had my name on it, alphabet came off, rank came off, anything that would designate who I was. And the first place I went to was the little deposit box for the Salvation Army, Goodwill. And as I was depositing, this kid says, "Are you going to give the shoes?" I said, "Yeah, take the boots too." But then I had to take back the boots because my names were stapled, stenciled onto the back. And I go, God, just my luck, this guy would come into a bank, have a robbery, they'll say, Chmielewski. And my wife wouldn't have minded because she's finally got rid of him, He's in prison where he belongs. But that would be the only thing I kept. Everything else besides, and my dog tags. Anything that had my name, I kept. Did you ever know why they have dog tags? Did you find out?
Well, to identify the body.
My dad told me the real reason. Now, his were a little different. I think we still have them. Don't have to bring them in to you. The dog tags that we have now are sort of oval shape, right? Well, his were oval, but on the very end it had a dit.
You have one nick in it.
A nip. And you know what that was for?
Stick in your teeth.
Put in your mouth, in your teeth. And the medic's job was to put it in the mouth and then kick it shut with his foot like this so it would jam it tightly into the mouth. That's how they identify. And I told my father was telling me that story, and I said, thanks, Dad. But that was a story that, we didn't have those types in Vietnam. They did away without them. They figured.
They had toe tags, I think.
Yeah. And you get two dog tags. One on the big chain and one on the small chain. And of course, one goes to your company commander and the other goes to the morgue. So that's it.
Do you have any pictures?
Of those?
Do you have any pictures from Vietnam? From your service? Do you have any pictures from your service?
No, I didn't.
Not a one.
No, huh? No.
Your service picture?
I have a lot of pictures of, they're all up here. Best times in Seattle, Ivars, right at the coast, seafood. Because if you're in the Army, you can only eat so much of this food before you become part of it. You know what I mean? So anytime I was a civilian, I go down to the down to the coast, down to the Puget Sound, and Ivars, one of the best places in the world to eat for seafood. So I had a lot of pleasant memories down there. And then, of course, this is during the hippie, revolution, and we had plenty of hippies down there. From Haight-Ashbury, from California, San Francisco, coming down also. But And a lot of the people there were like us, you know. The only ones we really resented were those females. Mostly they were females too, which really upset me. Calling us baby killers and spitting at us, you know, because they'd be at Fort Lewis around there in the PX, and they'd spit at us because these would be civilians that would be allowed to come on base. And I thought, well, that's, you know, come on, you know, if you only knew the history, you wouldn't. That's the girl I wanted to take my place. Your anger we can use, you know. I don't know, but that's about my composite in the military. Now, once I was discharged, I had to serve 4 more years on what they call, 2 years inactive. In other words, if something happened, they could always call me back. That's when I told my wife, I said, let's get our passports in order. And she said, you'll never get called back. I said, I don't know, I'm not going back. It's like a prisoner, you know, I don't want to go back. But did I gain something positive out of all this negativity? Yeah, I think I did. I think I learned to become more patient. I learned to try even more than ever to try to see both sides of a story. I was opinionated before I went in. I'd say, this is the way it is, damn it all. She'll tell you. And then I found out, well, maybe there's another side. This is the way it could be, you know. I wouldn't admit that right away. I would just say, here's my point of view and whatever you want to call that other side. And then after years, I learned to be more diplomatic. It's hard. It's been a hard transition, but I've done that. So that was a gain. I also gained a lot of respect because we had at that time, a lot of West Pointers. These are people that were in Vietnam, came back, and were our commanding officers at Fort Lewis. And they were getting out of the service because they didn't like what was happening to the service at that time. The never-ending war, kind of like what we have right now in Afghanistan. They said, you know, we're getting tired of having body bags come home. You people don't remember, but the war virtually was fought on television. You'd see the war on TV with the bodies coming back. It was only Bush that said, I don't want this to be seen on television. It's ugly. Well, damn it, I'll show it. They need to be seen, the ugly as well as the good. But they wanted to censor it. And I think when you censor anything, you have problems, whether it be language, war, anything. And that's what I learned, not to censor anything. You got to keep an open mind, even if it's hurtful, painful. You know, and it is sometimes very painful. You got to keep an open mind about it, because it may strongly disagree with whatever your thing is, whether it be religious, personality feelings, your likes and dislikes. Somebody's telling you something you don't like to hear right away, but you got to say, take a deep, you know, swallow and just say, okay, tell me. And then I remember being a teacher, a lot of kids would ask me, oh, you were in Vietnam? Well, you know, no, I wasn't. I was in the Vietnam conflict. Well, did you kill anybody? They love this John Wayneism, you know what I mean? And by the way, John Wayne was never in the service. He was getting draft deferments, you know what I mean? What is going on in this world? But he was the hero of World War II. And, you know, the iconic hero. And they'd say, did you kill anybody? And I said, no, as a medic, my job was to patch them up if I could. Oh. Did you ever shoot a gun? Yeah, we all had to qualify with 45 and, you know, the M16. Did you like that? I go, hated it. Did you like the bayonet course where they teach you how to kill with a bayonet? No, didn't like it. What part did you like? Coming home. Didn't understand that, but you got to learn their mindset. They were watching TV, and of course what they love is everything related to the war, but nothing. We only begin now, some years after Vietnam, to see these movies that show the travesties, the people that had to meet these people. That was another job. Oh yeah, my wife laughs at this. Knowing me, of course. I get sappy, okay? One of the jobs they offered me, if I wanted to get out of the military early, was to meet the bodies coming back at Lewis and escort them home in a military convoy. And they said, we can get you out early. I said, what am I doing? You're going to meet the coffin and you're going to take it to whatever destination in the West Coast. You and, you know, some other guys. Norm, you're going to be the greeter. Knock on the door and say, I got Jimmy Jones in the back of the truck. What do you want? And I go, you get the wrong guy for this job. I'd be like a sopping baby out there. I would. I'd be, oh, gee. Hey, forget it. I'm sorry. take me instead. You know? I could never do that job. If it was offered, and I said no. That takes a special. I don't know how you get through a day with that one. And I remember seeing a movie recently with, I can't think of the character's name, Bacon.
Can be.
Or something chance or.
Do you know what I'm talking about? He was one of the greeters.
Yeah.
And you saw the turmoil. I mean, after a while, how many of these can you do where it starts eating into your own soul? It's a cancer that just takes you apart. I don't know, I would be, I don't even like, my wife laughs because I wanted to be a veterinarian because I love dogs. And she says, you would have been the worst vet in the world. You'd have to put down one dog and you'd be, no, I wouldn't do that. She's a good thing you never became a vet. Well, that's the way I would be with this, too. I'd be the worst guy to meet at the door. They would feel worse after I left than, God, thank God he's gone. He made me terrible. So I would never do that. But that was one of these odd jobs. It's called it a job, a MOS. But I was lucky that I did not do combat, and I was blessed. I feel good about that. I feel bad that some of my friends had to go and did go. And maybe one reason why I don't want to, latch into them is because, or connect with them, I don't want to hear the misery anymore. I lived it for 2 years. I want to have a happy face. And to me, my happy face is not doing anything to do with this.
So have you met again with any of them at all?
Only my barber. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I came out of the service, there he was cutting hair. And that's about the only guy I met. I had a couple of phone calls. They wanted to do, sort of reunions, and I said, thank you, but no thank you. I didn't want to. As I say, we're a unit that was not happy being, we were happy being National Guard, doing something, because the Guard is supposed to protect the country that you're in for all kinds of calamities, floods, riots, whatever. But we are not happy actually being collected into the war. Now, because of that, as you can see, we have now the Air National Guards being called in Afghanistan, 1, 2, 3 tours. The one that opened up that policy is my hero, LBJ. I love this guy. Can't say enough about him. When I go through Texas, I always salute, Somewhat of a salute. I wave anyway. I call it finger exercise. But anyway, that's me. If you wanted a hero, you got the wrong guy. I'll tell you. Ironically, I've known a lot of people, as I told you about meeting this Rene Gagnon. There was a shock to me when I realized that he was a custodian. I mean, he was a janitor. Nothing beneath him, but a man. I thought, if you were at Iwo Jima, you should at least have lots of money because of the notoriety. He didn't want any of that. And when he told me right to my face, because I asked him which one, he wouldn't even tell me which one he was. He says, I was one of the original, and I was in, that's me. He says, I wouldn't want anything for it. He says, the real heroes never came back. He said, I would be a dishonor to their memory. I said, ooh, put me in my place at 18 years old, which I thought I knew it all. I said, well, thank you very much, crawl out of here now. But that's the kind of man he was. And as I say, at that time, he was maybe making $1.50 an hour.
Where'd you meet him?
Chicopee Mills. Yeah, it's in Manchester, New Hampshire. At that time, it was a textile mill place. They made all kinds of things at that time. Then they later made Johnson & Johnson products. And when I was there, it was just anything. They made cotton, material shirts, but it was fascinating. And the mill would go 24 hours a day, 3 shifts, 365 days a year, never shut down. That's how popular it was.
So you just worked at like a summer job?
Summer job. And it was, my father said, this is going to be the greatest awakening you'll ever have. Oh, yeah. Because I thought I was going to go off to Europe, do a little bumming around, I said, I'm 18, what don't I know? Come on, Dad. One summer down there, I said, yeah, I'm in college.
Yeah, I worked in a glass factory nights.
Oh, it's an eye-opener, isn't it? And then when you see these people have to come home with this humble little check and make a living out of it, you go, I mean, not that I didn't need the money to survive. You know, my money was just like maybe I'd buy some extra clothes when I'm off to college. These guys had to survive on this money. Food, sustenance, you know.
How'd you come on and talk to him? How did the subject come up?
I was the elevator boy. Classy job. They had this, what they call a freight elevator. And they didn't trust the individual, you know, employee guys working the elevator to do their own. It was one of these lever jobs, going up, going down. And it was a huge elevator, I don't know, maybe a distance of 20 by 20, very deep, because they wheel in these cotton balls, or bales of cotton, into it to take them from one floor processing to another. And that was my job. And the guy who was teaching me how to work the elevator, this is very complicated, up, down, you know, I took some. I said, let me work about this for 6 weeks. I think I got it. He said, you got to make sure your floor is level. Then he introduced me to this guy. And then I would see him every day because he would use the elevator to go from floor to floor. And this mill was enormous. It was on the Merrimack River. And you now see pictures of that mill and that river. Every time you see Sununu on the news, that's Chicopee Mills. Well, I know it. I go, yeah, there he is. Yeah, I've been there. And I laughed at my wife. I said, it's come a long way from when I've been there, I'll tell you. So that's how I met him, on the elevator going floor to floor.
Would you first ask him to get into, did you just say, were you in World War II?
Well, no, the guy introduced me. He was always talking about it. He said, you know, we got a World War II hero here. And I went, yeah, sure you do. As you talking about my dad, he doesn't work here anyway. He said, no, we got Rene Gagnon. I said, well, who in God's name is Rene Gagnon? It was all a French community at that time. With me being there, as Polish, and we fit in like nothing because we didn't speak French at all. He said, we got Rene Gagnon. Haven't you heard of him? And I went, no. He said, he was at Hiroshima. And I went, Hiroshima, really? Yeah. So it was fascinating because I just graduated high school and I had this wonderful teacher at high school, Father Parody, who was brilliant in history. And I loved history right away. And so I said, tell me more about this, because I was enthralled with this. Being an English teacher, you know, you become a history major also. So I said, tell me more about this. So he told me about the guy, and one day the guy got on the elevator with us, and he says, this is Rene. And he, as I say, he wouldn't have 3 words out of the guy. He kept his head down, very, very humble guy. And he told me, he says, yeah. That's what. And then I quiz him until he put me down, quickly telling me that the real heroes, they don't come back. So I was very humble. He walked in, and that job lasted, you know, as I say, what, 2.5, 3 months for the summer, and I was gone. And he lived there, and I think the strangest thing is, out of that town of New Hampshire, the state, they only had 3 really important people that ever come out there. President Pierce, who was one of the worst presidents ever, did nothing. Then we had Lynn McCullough, who was one of the first shuttle, remember the one that blew up? She was one of the teachers that didn't come down. McCullough. And then we had one other, Alan Shepard. So there's 4. Alan Shepard was the first man in outer space. Came from my mother's hometown of Derry, New Hampshire. And I used to say, how the hell is he? If you could have seen Derry at that time, even at my days, my mother took me out to Derry, because that's where she was from. And when we went out to see the grandfather's, you know, her home, it was a farmhouse, and probably had only like 500 people in the whole city, town. Now it's a bedroom community for Boston. That's what it is. But when I was there, I used to hate going there because they had no bathroom. It was the outhouse with a rope. You know what I mean? Going out to the outhouse, and I said, Mom, I know it's your father, but can he visit us? You know, it'd be a lot easier. But this town is where these people came. This Robert Frost and this Alan Shepard. And you would think, well, they come from these cities, you know, the cultured city, but they didn't. They were farm people, you know. And Alan Shepard was amazing watching him on television, because people would say, he's from Derry, phony, where's he from? And we had to laugh. I go, Derry, dummy, that's where he's from. I know Derry. But anyway, those are the small towns. So I grew up in the city of Manchester, of course, which is like, at that time maybe 150, 200,000 people. But, you know, it was very much industrial city at that time. Now it's, I don't know, what is it? It's sort of, all that's gone, all the mills are gone. They use the mills now for offices, law offices. They have hotels and banquet fests there. And of course, they attract all the presidential things, as you know, the nominees and things like that. And again, it's a bedroom community for Boston. Otherwise, the town would have evaporated, you know. But
Any last questions? I know we're about at the end of this.
Yes. So how did you go from medicine to, I know that you did that in the service, but how did you go from medicine to like English literature and all that?
well, I was always involved in drama and English and history, speech. The way I got into medicine probably is a better approach. I can answer that better than the other one. When you go into the service, you take an IQ test. It's an IQ test, and then they give you a battery of tests to figure out what you're best at. You know, what would be your MOS, Military Occupational Schooling. And at that time, when I was in the National Guard, I said, what's the easiest way for me to come here and then go home? You know, I'm going to put on my uniform, do my job, and then I want to go home. What can I become? And the guy said, clerk. I said, I like that already. What's he do? Clerk, you know, you take messages from your superior, you hand out mail from mail call. I says, I'm your man. And they said, whoop, unfortunately it's full. Okay. What else can I do? Have you ever liked firing a cannon? I go, not that I can remember. And then they looked at my other MOS and they said, I noticed that you're very bad at mechanical. And I go, yeah. You can never become anything to do with mechanics, whether it be auto shop, anything. You got to stay away from that because you'll kill yourself. I said, well, thank you very much. Well, what else is left? I said, would you like to cook? And I said, okay. What does that do? And the guy told me what a cook does. I said, doesn't sound. He said, no, one other thing. When you're in a combat situation, the cook now becomes the mortician. I said, how does that work? He said, well, think about it. If you've got a firefight and people are dying, they need somebody to put them in bags and ship them and store them and do all that. And they're obviously not eating hot meals, are they? And I guess not with all that shipping and body bagging. I know my appetite wouldn't be piqued. I don't know. So from that, they said, well, that's what your job would be. And I said, you know, that doesn't sound like me again. What else is left? And I guess the last, yeah, now we're talking. Human anatomy, I know what you're talking about. And my mind, of course, is thinking of females, and it's what he wasn't even thinking of. He goes, come to your senses. You're going to be talking about men. There are no women where you're going. I went, again, maybe a bad choice. What else we got? He said, well, this is what you got, an MOS, and you think about medic. He said, you're going to love that. He said, you really don't do much of anything. You go to school, they teach you the basics, you know, how to do blood pressure, how to do tests, how to give shots, how to treat somebody. He said, and you learn the basic anatomy. He says, you're pretty good at anatomy. I can see your scores are very high. He says, or you can become an officer. He said, you can become an officer and we can send you to OCS school, Officers Candidate School. He says, the only thing when you go to Officers Candidate School, you're going to have to extend your time in the service. And I said, there you go again, swearing. How much more time? He said, well, you got to put in 2 more years. And I went, you got me for 6. Now you want to hook me into 8? I said, you know, not that I don't love you, and don't take this personally, but I want to be here for 6 or less. What else you do? So I became a medic. That was it. It wasn't a very complicated thought processing where I just sit down and go, no, it was like, this is it. So after basic training, they just ship you right out to Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas, and you learn how to give shots. Want a funny story? I'm in the service here. We're at Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas. And the guy on the plane flies down with me is from Baltimore, Maryland. His name is Posner, Arnold Posner. Love this guy. I thought I was weird until I met him, and he made me feel good right away. I said, this is like a blood relationship. We get off the plane in Texas, and it was so hot. If you've ever been in San Antonio in the summer, it's unbearable. He says, how are you getting to Fort Sam Houston? I said, I don't even know where it is. How are we getting there is another story. He says, do you want to come with me? And I figure, where are you going? He says, same place. Okay, sure. He says, I've got my father already hooked me up with a car. Really? Come to find out, his father owned Posner's Motors and Tracking Company in Baltimore. Huge complex. He says, my father's got me hooked up with a T-Bird. Would you mind going in a Thunderbird? I don't know. Compared to the bus I'm going to be riding in with no air conditioning? Yeah, I find that objectionable really big, yeah. So we jump into his car. Well, this guy was the biggest germophobic you ever met in your life. And he's a medic, okay? He could not touch anything without having a napkin. If he touched this chair, as soon as he touched it, napkin. And then he would touch anything. Well, can you see this guy giving shots? And then they had to practice on dummies, luckily. This is the only part of the dummies that we didn't become the dummies. Enemas and things like that. Can you imagine him? And they go, pause, okay, give the enema a dummy. And he'd go, do I have to? And he would have a napkin, a tissue. And the guys would just break into laughter. This guy was a medic, and I often thought, if this guy ever went into combat, you could bleed to death. He would say, I'm sorry, I'd love to help you, but I haven't got any more napkins. You look pretty bad. You simply, you're not going to make it. You know? I'm sorry, I'll give you one of these and send you home. You know? But that guy was great. He made my day every day. We had to pull KP duty. And every time he got KP duty while he was there, he paid people off so he wouldn't, because he couldn't take it. His hands were just raw red, you know, from washing and greatest guy I ever met in my life. Loved him. Because again, these are the kind of people that make you survive, you know, a bad ordeal. Arnold Pulaski. There's one guy I should look up someday. You can't shake hands with him, it's all about. I guess nowadays he'd give you one of these, you know, with a glove on. Hey, bro. I don't know. But it's true. I don't know what I would do without him. Had a lot of fun with him. He kept me alive again when we were in basic training, because when you're in basic training, we'd go down, we'd Padre on him, and just go off the base. And it was neat. Neat guy to be around. So that's one thing I think I gained a lot about the service. It broadened my horizon better than any college, school, or anything could ever do. Because prior to then, growing up in a small town in New England, it's like you got blinders on. All you see is New England. You think everybody's just that way. It's the way the world is. Then you get out there into the service and you go, holy God, there are real different types of people here. Do you know how many black people we had in my hometown of Manchester when I was growing up?
One.
I think we had, maybe one guy. I'm guessing even, I'll give him that, because I think one guy, I don't even know if he was imported or if he was just visiting either. But we had like one guy. Nobody in my high school. Nobody in the colleges back then. It's changed since. We had no Hispanics, and that's changed. No Puerto Ricans, Hispanics, or any kind, Latinos of any kind. So that was an eye-opener. Now, my dad told me in World War II, and I heard you guys mention before, a Marine that was black, that was kind of like ostracized, and rare that he was in. Even rarer that in World War II, they didn't billet them together. Blacks and whites were separate. They didn't fight together. When they went off into combat, they called them night fighters, the black folks. And that's when they went into Paris, especially the girls loved them because these are our night fighters, because they're black. They don't want to be seen. It's camouflage. It's permanent. And if people bought it, they went, it's a good deal, night fighter. Again, that was part of this racial thing. Well, so that opened my mind to a whole new bevy. When I went through basic training in Georgia, Megna and I were probably one of the few white guys there. He was from Boston, I was from Manchester, and together we were the only ones. They got the biggest kick out of us because we were white. And when we went into Georgia, and we went in from basic training, where they gave us like I think it's, after the fourth week you get a little, they allow you to go into town. And the town was Augusta, Georgia. And at that time we went into Augusta, and this is 66. And I can still remember going into that town, and all the bars there would have signs, blacks use the back. And it didn't say blacks, it said niggers use the back. And I looked at Megna, he and I grew up, and he grew up in Boston, where, the race was no problem. And I remember we went into one bar, and I guess we used the wrong door. The whole bar just looked at us like this, like we had, some kind of a pox on us. We were lepers. And the bartender said, and we went out that door fast into the back. Who's on stage but James Brown, who's from Augusta, and this is where James Brown started, the singer. And he's on stage, and silhouetting him is what they call scrims. You know what a scrim is? It's like a shade, it's like a loose knit white sheet. So that if you can light it from one angle, it'll blind you. But if you light it from the back, it opens up so you can see. We could see James Brown, and the blacks could not see him until he performed on that side of the screen. They could hear him, but they couldn't see him. Then towards some of the songs, we'd get blacked out, and they would get the light. And this is the weirdest thing. James Brown singing, he's black, we're in Augusta, and we're separated. And I've never seen this in my life, this racial separation like this. Never. It's incredible. And I thought, this is the Civil War? This is 1966, not 1863. It was slow to move. Strange. Told you, first interview, you'll never shut me up. Questions, please, give me questions.
Our tape is done. I don't know if you guys have any questions, but you got the tape camera still running, right?
Yeah, I've had my thing goes a half an hour, then I had to reset it. So
I've been talking that long.
yeah, I had to reset it 6 times already. Not
See, my wife's been asleep for about an hour. She goes, she goes, I've heard so many.
I got a question for you. After
You
you
got
got
it.
out of the service, you said you spent 4 more years in the National Guard.
No, I was on call for 4 more years.
So what happened during that time?
Nothing. They never called me back. I never went to any more meetings. See, by drafting me, I then became the same status as a U.S. What they call a draftee was a U.S. I was an NG. Once you were drafted, then you have to go 4 years, which they call 2 years of inactive status, which means if they have any conflicts, if they had any riots, and at that time in L.A., I said, oh my God, I hope we don't have another riot, because I don't have any uniform to put on. I'll have to get on the Salvation Army and say, do you have anything with a Chmielewski tag? Because I had zip, but I'm sure they would have come up with something. But luckily, nothing happened in that 2 years. And then you go the last 2 years, what they call a total, I don't know what they call standby. In other words, you're just there. God forbid if we don't have a war, you're okay. But by that time, I was already into my early 30s, so I figured,
Were you getting things from the military, like annually saying, just to let you know you're still around,
Didn't want to know. They were very upset that, number one, that we were there. Because we protested, I'm telling you, this hit all the way to the Senate, about our protesting. The Burbank unit was the first National Guard unit that actually had lawyers working in our benefit because of the illegality of it. So they were just said, let's get rid of these bozos as quick as we can, They're a black eye for us. And of course, then we lost LBJ. Thank God. And we didn't have to have any more come to you with a heavy heart. I hated that guy. God, it's like a nightmare. It's my worst nightmare hearing his voice, Then we got Bobby Kennedy. Remember, he ran and he got shot. And I thought, oh my God. I was in the service when he got shot. We were in Lewis, and I thought, there's our hope. We're never getting out. Because they were already talking about extending our stay, and hopefully, because they could do that. Instead of going home, I said, oh my God, my wife will never believe this, that I'm in for another 2 years. So that was our biggest fear. When Bobby got killed, it's over. I guess I'll become a career soldier. So that ended my term. And the only thing else we ever had to do with the military is buying homes, of course, on the VI benefit. We had things to do with that. Education, when I did my master's and all that, used my GI benefits for that. That was a positive thing, which gets me fired up again. I listened to McCain, John McCain, who some people call a hero, and here's what bothers me about John McCain. He just wants to cut away all of those benefits to even some of these soldiers who come home maimed, crippled, and things like this. And he only wants to give benefits to those soldiers who are career-orientated. And I think, why was that? He himself didn't make a career out of it. I mean, he had to pull out of the service because of injuries, you know what I mean? He was a prisoner, God forbid. He came back, he was maimed. So I guess you can't collect any money either. That bothered me. Every time I hear him say that, I just want to cringe, because a guy goes over to Afghanistan, loses a leg, comes back home, they want to reschool him, and they say, schooling's okay, but we can't pay for it because McCain's bill, he wants to cut these people out. I go, come on. If anybody, you should, and you hug this guy and embrace him. He's one of you. But we've always had this. Vietnam vets came back from the war. They were not cheered, revered at all. They were scorned. It was like, you guys didn't win the war. And you're having that same thing right now happening in this country. Iraq and Afghanistan. What's the win? What's the loss? So when you don't win, nobody likes you. My dad came back from World War II a different way. He was a hero because we won the war. But it seems, and I always kid, I said, I guess if you want to make a country popular, go to war with us, because you're always going to come out financially ahead of the game. Japan was, look at them, they're fledgling now. Come on, we drive these cars, don't we? We buy all their products. Vietnam, from underwear to, and it started with underwear, but now we got everything in Vietnam being built too. People laugh, but what's going to come out of Afghanistan and Iraq?
Nothing.
I know we're not there for nothing.
There's not a lot there, I tell you.
You don't know, you know what I'm saying? Nobody knows the future. So I think what bothers me the most about being a veteran is we don't treat the veterans nicely at all. We give them lip service. Great, this guy was in this war, good, this war. Look at the Korean vets. We're only starting to look at them with a little more respect. In the beginning, they weren't even looked on upon. Korea, that's another war. Did you guys win that one? Not really. Well, had to be something wrong with the way you were fighting. Vietnam, definitely wrong the way you were fighting. Afghanistan, Iraq. And now we're talking about other conflicts. I say, my idea of winning a war, we can go, Mexico, we won't have any more problems. We'll go there, the war will be over in about 24 hours or less, and we can use, and we don't have to worry about importation, deportation, illegal aliens, and we're all going to become United States citizens. And the borders will no longer exist. And it'll be a win-win, but is that going to happen?
We had Grenada.
Yeah. See, that's the problem. We fight these wars, but I kid my wife, and I say, I don't know how many, being at Lewis, of course, that's where all the bodies are coming in and out, as I told you. Being at Lewis, every Saturday we'd have these grand parades on this field of thousands of soldiers. And here I was in my Red Cross Jeep, and we would just handle those guys that fall over, pass out because of the heat, in the sun. And one time I was out there, and we actually gave an award to a guy that blew his toe off while pulling out his 45 caliber rifle, pistol, at a range. And all of us were out there to give him an award, and I went, well, he sounds stupid. What are we giving him an award for? Give us an award for standing out here in the sun, But it was that, sometimes they just love parades, and as much as I hate to tell you, we love the funerals. We really do. We love sadness. Look at the saddest stories we tell now are the ones that now want to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery, only to find out they've been dumping bodies back there, misplacing bodies. Can you imagine being one of the loved ones of these guys? You mean my husband isn't here? No, we need a room. We dumped him. What do you mean you dumped him, misplaced him, you don't know where he is? Does that bother you? That bothers me. That makes me almost want to go to war. Okay? Give me a damn rifle and a pen. I'm going to war. See, that's what I get pissed about with the inequities. Maybe that's why I became a teacher, because I saw so much of it, and I said, we've got to better inform people not to make stupid decisions. We've got to start thinking before we act. We become reactionary. It's like going to a sporting event. It's like a soccer event of the world. We got to kick the hell out of somebody because we lost or we don't like that team. Rather than sit down and say, it's a game, it's a game.
I'm going to say thank you because I have to go somewhere.
Oh, no, don't get me going. Thank you for stopping me.
No, normally I never do.
You got to thank me.
I'd have put in another tape, right? I would ask you about your stuff.
I hope I've answered questions. I hope this has been helpful to some of you, all of you. My wife is yawning, and she says, God, I had another day of this. I'll kill myself.
I'm going to make you a copy of my notes, okay? I don't know if you can read my handwriting. Can you read
I've
mine?
enjoyed meeting you. I mean it.
Yeah.
All
It
of
was a
you.
pleasure.
But
My pleasure. I
we'll
mean
make
it.
your tape as well. We'll make our tape. I guess you've got your own download stuff.
Yeah.
We